You are packed into the Colosseum, 50,000 people around you, and two fighters walk out onto the sand. You think you know what happens next. To men, evenly matched, settle it, and the best one wins. Simple, fair, except almost none of that is true. The weapons are mismatched on purpose. One of these men will probably walk away just fine. And the person who really decides how this ends is not either fighter. It is the man in the fancy seat, reading the mood of the crowd. Because the Colosseum was not a fair fight, it never was, it was entertainment. Produced, staged, and rigged right down to the ending. Welcome to the greatest fixed show in history. So here is the question nobody asks. How fair were the fights in the Colosseum, really? And the answer is going to ruin the movie version for you. Because once you see how much of it was staged, mismatched, and controlled, you will realize the Romans did not invent the fair fight. They invented something we are still hooked on, the fixed, crowd-pleasing spectacle that only pretends to be a real contest. And by the end, you are going to recognize it because you watch a version of it every single week. Let's start with the biggest myth, the one every film sells you. Gladiators did not usually fight to the finish. I know, sit down, think about it from the money side. A trained gladiator was wildly expensive. He was fed, housed, and coached for years by professionals and owned by a man who rented him out for a fee. If your fighter was lost every single time he competed, you would be ruined in a month. So most bouts ended with a clear winner and a loser who lived, patched up to fight another day. A grim ending happened, but it was the exception, not the rule, because a fighter who is gone cannot sell tickets next month. There were even referees, real ones, officials with long staffs who stood in the arena, enforced the rules, paused the action, and could stop a match. This was not chaos, it was closer to a brutal, regulated sport, with a rulebook, than random mayhem. Hold that, because it changes everything about what the fight actually was. And here is the thing that ties all of this together. The entire day was programmed. A day at the Colosseum was not random violence breaking out. It was a curated lineup, running on a schedule built like a festival. The morning had the beast shows, the opening act. Around midday came the grim interludes, the part where a lot of the crowd actually went out for lunch. And the afternoon, that was the main event, the star gladiators, the headliners everyone had come to see, saved for last to keep you in your seat. There was a running order. There were warm-ups, there was a finale. Someone had planned the emotional arc of your entire afternoon, when to shock you, when to thrill you, when to hand you a hero that is not a battle, that is show business. The next time you sit through the opening acts waiting for the headliner, or refuse to leave before the main event, you are following a Roman running order. Blame it on Rome. Now, the first rig, and it is baked into the whole thing. The fights were not fair, and they were never meant to be. Gladiators came in types, and the types were deliberately mismatched. Picture one man with heavy armor, a big shield, a helmet, and a short blade, but slow. Now put him against a man with almost no armor, no shield, bare head, carrying a net and a long trident, but fast. That is a real classic pairing, the net fighter against the pursuer. Armor against speed, reach against protection. That is not to equal men, that is rock, paper, scissors with a plot. The entire appeal was the mismatch, the puzzle of watching totally different styles collide. A fair fight, two identical guys, would have been boring, so they engineered contrast. Every headline bout was a designed matchup, chosen to look dramatic, not to be even. Sound like any scripted rivalry you can think of, blame it on Rome. Here is the second rig, and it is the famous one. When a gladiator was beaten but still standing, he could raise a finger and appeal for mercy. And who decided what happened next? Not a judge, not a rule. The crowd and the man hosting the games, usually the emperor. The mob would shout, gesture, turn their thumbs, and the host would read the room and give the signal. Think about what that means. The ending was not determined by the fight. It was determined by the audience. If the crowd liked you, If you had fought bravely, if you gave them a show, you were spared. If you bored them, you were in trouble. The outcome was a popularity contest. The fighters were performers and the audience voted live with their hands. If that sounds like a talent show where the crowd decides who stays, yeah. 2,000 years before live audience voting, Rome was already doing it. Blame it on Rome. Now we have to be honest, because the Colosseum was not all sport. Between the crowd-pleasing duels, there were events that were not fights at all. Condemned prisoners, unarmed or hopelessly outmatched, were sent out with no chance whatsoever. This was not a contest. It was a public punishment dressed up as part of the show for the midday crowd. And the Romans got theatrical with it. Sometimes they staged these as scenes from myth and legend, with elaborate sets and costumes, so a famous story from mythology was acted out live in the arena. Real people forced into a scripted role in a fully produced set piece. It is grim and we should not pretend otherwise. But notice the instinct. Take something brutal and real and package it as a produced show with a story, a set, and a costume. Hold on to how modern that instinct is. Then there were the animals in the morning. Before the human bouts came the beast shows. Exotic animals from across the empire, lions, bears, leopards, even elephants, hauled in at staggering cost to be shown off and hunted in the arena. Some of this was skilled hunters putting on a display of nerve. A lot of it was pure one-sided spectacle designed to shock and awe with sheer scale. And the scale was almost unbelievable. At the festival to open the Colosseum, ancient sources claim many thousands of animals were used across the games. It was a flex of imperial power. Look how far our reach is. Look what we can drag from the edges of the world for your afternoon. The animal show was not a fair hunt. It was a special effects budget with a pulse. Blame it on Rome. Here is one that sounds completely made up. Sometimes they flooded the place. The Romans staged mock naval battles, actual ships, actual crews, fighting on water pumped into a purpose-built basin, and by some accounts even inside an amphitheater. Whole fake sea battles, reenactments of famous historical clashes, produced as a live show. Imagine the logistics. You flood a stadium, float warships in it, and stage a battle from history in front of a roaring crowd. That is not a fight, that is a blockbuster. That is water engineering, set design, costumes, casting, and spectacle on a scale that would bankrupt a modern film studio. The Romans were not staging fair contests. They were producing the biggest, most expensive live entertainment the world had ever seen, and every single part of it was controlled. And then there is the man who took the rigging to its absolute peak. There was an emperor, Commodus, who did not just host the games. He performed in them. He went down onto the sand himself and played gladiator. Except, of course, it was completely fixed. His opponents were handed wooden weapons, or ordered to yield, or simply not permitted to actually challenge him. He always won, every time. He also loved to take on animals from a raised, protected platform, shooting them from perfect safety while never in any real danger, then presenting himself as a fearless champion. And he charged the city an enormous fee for every appearance, straight out of the public treasury. So picture it, a powerful man rigging a fake contest so he always wins, staging it as reality, and billing the public for the privilege of watching him pretend. An emperor cosplaying as a hero in a show he had scripted for himself. Blame it on Rome. Now hold on. You might say, are you telling me the Colosseum was fake? That none of it was real? No, not at all. This is the uncomfortable balance. Real harm happened on that sand. The stakes were genuinely, permanently real for the people down there. This was not pretend violence with a stunt team. But here is the twist that matters. It was real and it was staged, both at once. The danger was real, but which matchups, when, how it was framed, and whether the crowd got to feel merciful or bloodthirsty, all of that was managed, curated, produced. It was reality, edited. The most honest way to describe the Colosseum is not a battlefield and not a play. It was the world's first reality show, where the stakes were terrifyingly real, but the whole thing was still a production. And that is the part that should sit with you, because the point of the whole machine was not really the fighting. It was control. The games were how emperors bought the mob. Free entry, free spectacle, a full day of drama, all provided by the man in power, so the crowd would love him and stay distracted. Keep them fed, keep them entertained, and they will not ask harder questions. A Roman poet had already nailed it with a phrase you still use 2,000 years later: bread and circuses. So the rigged fights were not a side effect, they were the whole design. A controlled spectacle, engineered to thrill you, to let you feel like you were part of it, deciding fates with your thumb, while the real power stayed exactly where it was, up in the good seats, watching you watch the show. But here is the warmer way to look at it. Strip away the cruelty, and what is left is something stubbornly human: the urge to gather by the tens of thousands, share one enormous story, pick a side, roar together, and feel something as a single crowd. We never lost that hunger. We just, thankfully, mostly took the cruelty out of it. The stadium, the arena concert, the scripted drama of the wrestling ring, the reality contest where the audience votes, the blockbuster spectacle, they are all the children of that Roman afternoon, with the worst part drained away. We kept the roar and dropped the rest. That is, honestly, a very good trade. So back to those two fighters walking onto the sand. Now you know, the matchup was built for drama, not fairness. The ending was decided by the crowd, not the contest. The grimmest events were stage theater, the beast shows were a flex, the sea battles were blockbusters, and at least one emperor wrote himself as the hero of a show he could not lose. Almost nothing in the Colosseum was a fair fight. It was the greatest produced spectacle in history, and every time you watch a scripted rivalry, roar in a stadium, vote off a contestant, or lose an evening to manufactured drama, you are sitting in that same arena 2,000 years later. You did not invent the show, you inherited it. So the next time entertainment pretends to be a real contest, you know exactly who to blame. Blame it on Rome.